One of the things that makes us such die-hard fans for mixed martial arts is that, unlike boxing, the fights the world want to see usually happen. If the fans want it and the fighters want it, most of the time it goes down. Sure, sometimes things go wrong and we miss out for one reason or another, like injuries with Khabib and Ferguson, or the failed negotiations like the ones that derailed Brock Lesnar and Fedor. It just happens. Then there's the batshit crazy stuff like the interwoven tales of mafia-tainted shady business practices that in part prevented a prime Chuck Liddell versus Wanderlei Silva. We mean after the 2003 Grand Prix, by the way. This one's after Rampage, the one with the infamous confrontation.
Because I want to fight with Chuck here. Chuck.
Many of these moments have passed for good and have been lost in the ether of time. I'm here to talk about those ones that were really close to happening. I'm Jason from MMA On Point, and here are 10 incredible fights that almost happened. Number 10, Matt Hughes versus KARO PARISYAN. KARO PARISYAN is one of those big what-if tales in mixed martial arts. He was the former WEC welterweight champion and had a standout career in the UFC, winning bouts over notable names like Nick Diaz, Shoney Carter, Matt Serra, and Chris Lytle, and being the first man to take GSP the distance. So it only made sense that he found himself scheduled to challenge the then title holder Matt Hughes for supremacy of the UFC's 170-pound class. The style matchup was fascinating, as Hughes' dominant wrestling and submission ability would be tested against KARO's world-class judo skills that at the time just weren't very common to find in MMA. A hamstring injury would force him to pull out of UFC 56, and Hughes would go on to fight Joe Riggs instead. This injury began a downward spiral that led to more injuries, mixed results in the cage, and an addiction to painkillers that prevented Parisian from making good on his initial impressive run in the promotion and his chance to cement his legacy with a UFC belt. Number 9, Anthony Pettis versus Jose Aldo. As two of the most popular and dangerous strikers to hold WEC gold, it was only natural that people would get curious about what a fight between Anthony Pettis and Jose Aldo would look like. Their paths nearly crossed several times and both were under the UFC banner. After Pettis won on a 3-fight win streak during Aldo's dominant run as featherweight champion, the two were booked to meet up at UFC 163, with Showtime willing to meet Aldo at 145 pounds. Now would be a good time for those tinfoil hats, as Pettis reportedly suffered a knee injury to force his withdrawal from the contest, only to be rebooked for a lightweight title shot against Benson Henderson only a few weeks later in his hometown of Milwaukee. After coming so close to taking place, the demand was higher for the fight, especially now with both as champion and Aldo being vocal about his ambitions to move up to 155 pounds, despite the UFC's resistance, back then anyway, to letting people have two championship belts at the same time. Boy, have times changed. There were even some reports that it was rebooked as Pettis' first offense before MMA Fighting released conflicted information. Number 8, Dominic Cruz versus Renan Barao. These two men seemed destined to fight each other. After dropping to bantamweight, Cruz went on an unparalleled undefeated run, capturing the WC crown before transitioning over to defending the UFC belt twice, and injury stopped his progress. In his absence, Renan Barao picked up the responsibility of champion without hesitation, snatching the interim title and defending it 3 times while Cruz sat on the sidelines. After several major surgeries and years of inactivity, the two would finally be scheduled to headline at UFC 169. That is until a groin tear this time once again forced Cruz on the shelf and finally prompted the UFC to strip him of his title, promoting Barao to undisputed status in his absence. The new dominant force versus the established champ that never lost the belt was a great fight that we just never got to see. Considering the fact that TJ Dillashaw was eventually the one to dethrone Barao using what looked eerily like his patented footwork, makes this a potential great moment lost to time and circumstance. Ironically, TJ apparently picked up this footwork as a training partner imitating Cruz for his then teammates at Team Alpha Male. Number 7, Mirko Cro Cop versus Randy Couture. Pride fans will never forget this one. When Cro Cop's signature head kick dimmed the lights of Alexander Emelianenko, Wanderlei Silva, and Igor Vovchanchyn in Pride, fans could only dream of what was possible in the UFC as Randy Couture made a dramatic return to the sport by handily defeating Tim Sylvia for the heavyweight title at age 43. Cro Cop's entrance to the UFC just after winning the Pride Openweight Grand Prix only added fuel to this speculative fire. After making a successful debut in the promotion by finishing Eddie Sanchez in the first round, the stage was then set for Couture versus Cro Cop for the heavyweight belt. just after one more tune-up fight though with Gabriel Gonzaga first. Or so we thought. Despite being undefeated in the UFC with all of his wins being finishes, no one seemed to pay the Brazilian much mind at all, with the heavily anticipated title fight being a foregone conclusion in most people's minds. But of course those expectations would lead to a cruel twist of irony that only the MMA gods could author. Cro Cop fell victim to his own signature move, and Gonzaga stole the title shot in one hell of a dream fight from ever happening. Number 6. John Jones versus Anthony Johnson. Jones has made mincemeat of everyone he's faced at light heavyweight. Rashad Evans, Shogun, Machida, and Daniel Cormier are among the notable names that he has gotten wins over. One of the glaring omissions from his resume, aside from UFC 151 opponent Dan Henderson following an injury and subsequent event cancellation, is Anthony Rumble Johnson. Making a triumphant return to the UFC at 205 pounds with 3 straight wins after an improbable and failed stint at welterweight, this had fans salivating to see if Rumble, who sent more than his fair share of opponents into the netherrealm with his ridiculous power, could give Jones a challenge and land one of those massive bombs. But of course, only weeks before their bout, Jones infamously ran a red light, crashed into a pregnant woman, breaking her arm and fleeing the scene on foot. In response, the UFC stripped him of his title, suspending him, and replaced him with Cormier at UFC 187. Johnson would lose that fight, but resume knocking out everyone else. And so, unfortunately, that Jones fight never materialized due to the champion's continued out-of-cage problems. Then Rumble's surprise retirement after losing to Cormier again, which has shut the door on this fantasy matchup for good, it seems. Number 5. Anderson Silva versus Jake Shields. At first glance, this one might seem kind of random, but no, it actually did almost happen. The Rumble on the Rock welterweight tournament featured some of the best names in the sport. At the time, Silva was one of the standouts in Pride and Cage Rage, who was quickly amassing an insane highlight reel. Shields was a former Shudo champion who established himself as a certified grappling threat, and they were in the same tournament. While Shields advanced to the semifinals by defeating former UFC middleweight champion Dave Vinay, Silva would face Yushin Okami, but lose by disqualification for nearly knocking him out with an illegal upkick. If you ask me, this is a total BS rule, considering how insanely talented you have to be to do that from the bottom. But had that kick not landed, Silva was winning up to that point and would have faced Shields in the semi-final round. Silva would go on to dominate in the UFC at middleweight, while Shields would go on to hold belts in Elite XC and Strikeforce before making his UFC debut. Their paths nearly crossed again when Shields defeated Dan Henderson in Strikeforce at 185, but Shields opted for 170 when he crossed over into the UFC instead. By the way, had Silva fought and defeated Shields at Rumble on the Rock, he would have been paired with Carlos Condit in the finals. Silva had some other intriguing fights that never happened too, like Matt Hughes and Kelvin Gastelum, but this one is just one illegal kick away from happening. Number 4. Wesley Snipes versus Joe Rogan. What the fuck, right? This is legend in the MMA community by now, but for the uninitiated, let's take a trip through the entirely ridiculous.
That's hard to pass up.
As action star Wesley Snipes faced some serious trouble with the IRS and he needed money and approached one of the original UFC founders, Campbell McLaren, to put on a match between himself and fellow martial arts movie man Jean-Claude Van Damme. Instead though, they offered up color commentator Joe Rogan around the time he was still hosting Fear Factor.
I am a big Fear Factor fan. I'm a big fan of anything Joe Rogan does, actually.
While he's most known for playing Marvel Comics vampire hunter Blade and drug lord Nino Brown in New Jack City, Snipes holds black belts in Shotokan Karate and Hapkido in addition to training in boxing, kung fu, and capoeira. Rogan happily accepted the offer and has well-known credentials with his black belts in Taekwondo, BJJ, and spent time as a kickboxer before reaching notoriety in stand-up comedy, television roles, and where he is now in the UFC. Rogan has gone into detail on his podcast about what led up to the bout offer.
And so they came to me and I went, how much money? And then they started talking. I said, okay. I said, I'll do it. And they're, are you serious? I go, I'll fight that guy. And he had no jiu-jitsu at all. We had lawyers. We had signed contracts, or we had negotiated contracts.
And that he had even begun training with Muay Thai champion Rob Kamen in preparation. Ultimately, the bout was scrapped, and Snipes served prison time for tax evasion, while Rogan returned to the mic instead. So we never got to see Simon Phoenix versus the world's scariest spinning sidekick. Number 3. Dana White versus Tito Ortiz. Yep, you heard that right. UFC president Dana White was actually scheduled to fight former light heavyweight champion Tito Ortiz in a real sanctioned bout.
If it wasn't a gimmick, I had to get licensed by the Nevada State Athletic Commission.
And while we are definitely cheating here because it was actually a boxing fight, it was with two of MMA's biggest names and is just way too good to pass up. They even did a special documentary on it with the UFC and Spike TV. Anyway, it's no secret that the two have had a rocky relationship, to put it mildly. A t-shirt that says "Dana is my bitch" is pretty bad, but Ortiz even added an additional clause to his contract that called for a boxing match between himself and White. Ortiz decided to exercise that clause, and White, who had a training background in the sweet science, eagerly accepted the challenge. White continued with his normal duties running the UFC while spending time every day preparing for the 3-round exhibition. He's done numerous interviews speaking on the grueling nature of those training sessions and sparring alongside professional heavyweight boxers, which was all also documented in that Spike TV special, which is on Fight Pass if you want to see it. It even got as far as White stepping up on the scale flanked by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and Ortiz no-showed. Unsurprisingly, both men have totally different stories as to why the former light heavyweight champion seemed to blow off the spectacle in the 11th hour.
I think Tito started thinking, this really wasn't a good idea. It's a lose-lose situation for me. If I beat the shit out of him, that should have happened. If I don't, that might not be good either.
Me and Dana, we agreed upon 50-50. But when it came down to it and it was going to get done, he said, we can't do that anymore. I can't give you anything. All of a sudden, I'm not going to get any financial revenue from it, and it didn't make sense to me. I'm a businessman, but I'm glad it didn't happen because I probably would have hurt him.
Supposedly, an impromptu altercation happened on an airplane between the two, but yet again, there were just more conflicting stories.
The Fertitta brothers had to jump in and break up the fight, so then I sat on the front of the plane, he sat in the back of the plane the rest of the flight.
Number 2. Mark Kerr versus Mark Coleman. Both made their mark on the world of MMA. Sorry.
You are one pathetic loser.
Anyhow, both were dominant wrestlers with elite credentials and employed that experience. Coleman has been referred to as the godfather of ground and pound, while Kerr was considered his younger 2.0 version with creativity on the ground and improved submissions. In fact, their pure destruction and effectiveness with headbutts and knees is widely believed to be a big reason why techniques like that were banned in the unified rules. The longtime friends and Ohio natives seemed intertwined, so it's only natural that some speculated what a fight between the two might look like. Enter Pride's 2000 Grand Prix. It actually seemed like it was going to happen. Kerr and Coleman mentally prepared to set their friendship aside in pursuit of tournament gold. The Smashing Machine beautifully chronicled the legendary tournament, revealing Kerr was undertrained in the beginning stages of his addiction to painkillers and overwhelmed by the toughness of his quarterfinal opponent, Kazuyuki Fujita, who would win a hard-fought decision to advance despite taking incredible punishment in the early going. Coleman, who got past Akira Shoji in his quarterfinal fight, would have then fought Kerr if he didn't lose to Fujita. It was that close. And because the fight was so hard, Fujita would throw in the towel after the bell to fight Coleman. The nature of Kerr's loss earlier in the night fueled more debate about how a clash with him and Coleman would have gone, considering Kerr's ability and Mark Coleman's unrelenting grit. Number 1. Fedor Emelianenko versus Randy Couture. Most think of their Affliction matchup that was blocked by the UFC, but it was much, much closer to being a reality than most people realize. In 2001, they just barely missed each other in the Rings King of Rings tournament. Fedor infamously had a cut that resulted in a totally bogus TKO loss to Kosaka. And guess who he would have faced in the next round had the cut not been opened? It was that close to happening. One silly rule about cuts. Instead, Couture easily dispatched of Kosaka and actually lost to Alistair Overeem's older brother Valentin by guillotine in the next round. Unfortunately, negotiations following Pride's closure between the UFC and Fedor's team fell apart with the insistence that M1 would co-promote his fights. Couture even attempted to leave the promotion in pursuit of the bout. Both men repeatedly expressed interest in facing each other over the years, even after both men saw ends to their championship reigns. The idea was teased again as the cover of EA Sports MMA. Ryzen would even try to lure Couture out of retirement to meet Fedor for its New Year's Eve show, but after years on the shelf and at over over 50 years of age, the Natural didn't accept the offer. And yeah, it's true, Fedor never faced the horse meat version of Overeem, and when the scrap bout with Josh Barnett became the nail in the coffin for Affliction, this is the one many fans wanted more than anything else. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Anthony Walker, who's just a machine with writing lists. Seriously, I'm not sure that he's human. You can follow him on Twitter at AntWalkerMMA, and the people that edited this list was, oh wait, it was me and Tom.
Friendship and unity.
Thanks for watching my list, guys. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and like. We upload at least 3 videos per week about MMA, and it really helps us out when you do so. If I missed anything on this vid, let me know in the comments, and feel free to follow me on Twitter at JasonTheHeart, or follow the official channel account at On Point MMA. Thanks for watching so much, and I'll catch you on the next video.